Elizabeth Taylor's Cleopatra isn't just a movie. It's a pop culture landmark that conjures visions of gold-embroidered gowns, mile-long processions, and a Hollywood romance that dominated headlines. Mention Cleopatra and people think of extravagance, record budgets, and the pairing of Taylor and Richard Burton. But this is the story behind the spectacle, the illness, the shutdowns, the relocation across oceans, and the emergency surgery that saved the film's queen. The role that rewrote the rules.
You stand before the throne of Egypt.
I know where I am!
You will state your purpose.
Matters I have no intention of discussing publicly.
I do not grant private audiences to unidentified persons.
I am Marcus Antonius.
I know who you are.
When 20th Century Fox chose Cleopatra to turn the studio's fortunes around, it was wagering on one thing above all: audiences would pay to see Elizabeth Taylor. She was the rare star who could carry an epic on charisma alone, and her contract, famously pegged at a then unheard of $1 million plus a share of the gross, made headlines before a frame was shot. Producer Walter Wanger had dreamed about a definitive Cleopatra for years, picturing a queen who was strategic, sensual, and modern. In Taylor, he saw the force who could eclipse the 1917 and 1934 versions and make the ancient world feel newly alive. On September 28, 1960, principal photography began at Pinewood. The sets already suggested a production thinking in cathedral dimensions, but a mild autumn breeze outside the soundstage became, in retrospect, the first ominous detail. The shoot required Taylor to work in chilly conditions, including a bare-shouldered scene done in biting air. What began as a sore throat turned into something far more serious. Cold air, hot studio politics.
You come here then running over with wine and self-pity to conquer Caesar.
So long now, you filled my life. Like a great noise that I hear everywhere in my heart.
Taylor's fever rose, lingered, and spiked as Pinewood fought damp weather and deadline pressure. For a time, the production tried to work around her absence, filming anything that didn't require the queen. Mamoulian adjusted coverage with ingenuity, relying on cohort scenes and bits of Rome without Cleopatra. But there's only so much Cleopatra you can shoot without Cleopatra. Taylor's doctors cycled through antibiotics and rest orders, and the crew went on partial standby as days bled into weeks. In November 1960, the news darkened. Taylor's fever hit dangerous territory, and her illness was reported as meningitis. Production halted. Fox's insurers stepped in to cover spiraling medical costs, but money couldn't buy what the set most needed: its star's recovery. The studio had 10 minutes of usable footage and millions already on the ledger. The pause unsettled everything. Mamoulian, who had been hired to deliver a swift, grand spectacle, suddenly found himself captaining a ship stuck at harbor. The screenplay was re-interrogated while the lead actress regained strength. By January 1961, patience was thin and budgets thinner. After months of weather, illness, and script discontent, Mamoulian resigned. The film needed a reset that only a wholesale change could credibly provide. That change arrived with Joseph L. Mankiewicz, a writer-director who believed epics work best when they remember to be human. A close brush with death.
Stand by to get on the next plane to London. I said, why? What's happened? He said, Elizabeth is very, very sick. They think she's going to die. She's in the hospital in London, and they want you to take over as Cleopatra. I said, I can't do that. She's a friend of mine. I would feel absolutely dreadful to do that if she's going to die.
Before Mankiewicz could stamp the film with his literate sensibility, a far more urgent drama unfolded. In early March 1961, Elizabeth Taylor's health collapsed again. This time it was pneumonia, and it moved fast. At one point, a news agency mistakenly reported she had died. That erroneous flash hinted at how precarious things were. Doctors performed an emergency tracheotomy to open her airway and save her life. An intervention that left a small scar and a large imprint on Hollywood memory. Taylor later described those days as a fog of hospitals, machines, and pain. The tracheotomy was decisive and life-saving, the kind of blunt clinical heroism that doesn't show up in screenplays but determines whether a screenplay will ever be filmed. Friends and colleagues visited or waited by phones. Eddie Fisher tried to shield her from the worst updates. This set sat in limbo while its star did the harder kind of work, breathing, stabilizing, recovering. Her recovery brought relief and a second chance. The surgery saved her voice and life, but it also changed the calculus around the production. The studio scrapped the English shoot and relocated to Rome's Cinecittà where weather could be kinder and space more controllable. Rome Reborn.
Play conqueror all you want, mighty Caesar. Rape, murder, pillage thousands, millions of human beings. But neither you nor any other barbarian has the right to destroy one human thought.
Cinecittà turned out to be both sanctuary and crucible. On September 25, 1961, cameras rolled again under Mankiewicz, who envisioned two interlocking tragedies, Cleopatra with Caesar and Cleopatra with Antony. He wrote at night and directed by day, a relentless rhythm that sometimes ran on stimulant injections. The new approach aimed to fuse court intrigue with intimate conversation, staging colossal sets as backdrops for psychological duels. Rex Harrison brought a dry, cutting intelligence to Julius Caesar, while Roddy McDowall emerged as a quietly formidable Octavian. And then there was Richard Burton, cast as Mark Antony after Taylor saw him electrify Broadway. When Taylor and Burton met on set in January 1962, crew members remarked on the electricity. On screen, their chemistry read as history's intoxication. Off-screen, their affair exploded across headlines, drawing condemnation from the Vatican and fascination everywhere else. The scandal didn't stop the work, but it reframed it. Cleopatra's story of power, desire, and consequence became uncannily mirrored in the production's own narrative. But beneath the tempest, Taylor was showing something rarer than tabloid heat: endurance. Less than a year after emergency surgery, she was doing marathon days in heavy costumes, navigating night shoots, stage smoke, and the fatigue that comes from playing every scene at a pitched, emotional scale. She had to be witty in Rome, imperious in Alexandria, and vulnerable in private chambers, all while the world monitored each breath of her private life. Logistics were also relentless. The Roman Forum rose on a vast backlot. Alexandria sprawled near Anzio, where the crew even discovered and cleared old landmines on a private beach. Battle sequences required flotillas, extras by the thousands, and camera rigs pushed to the equipment's limits. Production manager Forrest Johnny Johnston fell gravely ill and exited. Cinematographer Leon Shamroy collapsed from exhaustion. From disaster to premiere. By summer 1962, footage piled high. The rough cut ran to epic extremes, well over 4 hours. And the battles over what Cleopatra actually was began in earnest. Daryl F. Zanuck, newly back in charge at Fox, wanted one movie, not 2 parts. Mankiewicz had always imagined a pair, Caesar and Cleopatra, then Antony and Cleopatra. The first would end with the Ides of March, the second with the Asp. Zanuck thought audiences would come for Taylor and Burton and might not return for a split release. He wanted the pageant and the passion in one sitting, and he wanted Mankiewicz to economize. Editing turned bitter. Sequences went in and out. A first cut was screened in Paris. New scenes were ordered to harden Antony's spine and rebalance dynamics that, in Zanuck's view, tilted too much towards Cleopatra's dominance. In early 1963, the company reconvened for retakes in Spain and England, a last push that allowed Mankiewicz to nudge character beats back into the foreground. The film that finally arrived in New York on June 12, 1963 was still enormous, over 4 hours at its premiere, then trimmed for general release to satisfy exhibitors. Even in its contracted form, it looked unlike anything else. Color as architecture, costumes as argument, set pieces as the grammar of ambition. How close it truly came.
And I think it's hard for people when you've seen a Hollywood icon go through these severe medical problems, and she dealt with a lot of medical issues throughout her life. And we showed one picture there of her on oxygen, in a wheelchair, because again, the Hollywood glamour, it all goes to the wayside when you're starting to deal with a health problem.
When people say Elizabeth Taylor nearly died on Cleopatra, they're not exaggerating. The cascade is clear. A cold set and heavy demands led to a severe illness in London. Production halted as doctors worked to stabilize her. Months later, pneumonia hit and escalated into a full-on emergency. Reports of her death flashed before being corrected. Surgeons performed a tracheotomy, the intervention that both saved her life and permitted a return to work that at the time seemed anything but assured. What often gets lost is how intertwined that medical crisis was with the creative identity of the film. Cleopatra needed Taylor not only because her name sold tickets, but because Mankiewicz's reimagined epic depended on a central performance that could play chess with Caesar and Antony without losing the audience's sympathy. Now it's time to hear from you. What was the most surprising part of the story? Let us know in the comments section below.